Hello and welcome to the System of Care Learning Series. My name is Lee Taylor, and I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. Okay, this session is a webinar, so that means that all attendees are muted and your videos are off. We are recording the session and we'll make the recording available as soon as possible. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any questions. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. American Sign Language interpreters will be on screen throughout the session. You can change your view at the top portion of your screen. There should be a little box with little boxes above it, and you can change your view. Also, we are using live captioning this afternoon. And my slide moved. Sorry about that, guys. And as you can see, we may have some technical issues, so we just appreciate your grace and patience through that. Okay, here's my important part of housekeeping. To be eligible for continuing education credits and certificates of attendance, you have to be in the content portion of the webinar for at least 90%. This is a mandate by the boards. Please don't leave the webinar until the Q&A portion is complete because that counts as session content. You do not have to enter your contact information in the chat, as attendees and their time is tracked by Zoom. You must use the same email address to participate in this session as the one you used to register. It's our way of tracking who is in the room with us. And if you're concerned that you join by your phone instead of your work email, it's okay as long as you use that same link. That's perfectly fine. You'll still show up under the email address that you used to register. As you register for each session, remember, use the same email address every time. Don't switch back and forth between your work and personal. And in the coming weeks, not today and not tomorrow, you'll receive an email from me that will provide a link to access the session evaluation, then your certificate. You must complete the session evaluation to proceed to the certificate. There's a screenshot that shows the landing page, and you'll be able to click on the 2022 System of Care Learning Series to access the session evaluation and certificates. And lastly, you are responsible for printing your own certificates. We do not mail or email certificates. You go to that website and it houses several years of the SOC Academy. So if you lose your certificate at any time, just go back to that website and print another one. And now let's learn about our presenters. Shannon is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has had experience in this field working as an in-school therapist. Shannon sees individual clients, families, and couples in a private practice. Shannon is the trauma-informed care and resiliency consultant for the Kentucky Department for Public Health. She provides trainings for Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative, which includes Connect the Dots, Family Thrive, Parent Cafes, and Provider Cafes. And she's the lead for the Youth Thrive Initiative. She is a Kentucky credentialed trainer. And next we have Stephanie Sykes-Jones, who is the Tailored State Level Youth Leadership Coordinator at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. Prior to working with Tailored, Stephanie used her lived experience as a young person with PTSD and bipolar disorder, as well as her experience in foster care, to advocate for better services and supports for youth across the state and nation. In her current role, she helps other youth begin their own leadership journey and encourages partners to center the voices of youth and young adults in everything they do. She got connected with Youth Thrive's national work through her work with Tailored, which stands for Transition Age Youth Launching Realized Dreams. It's a grant that we have in Kentucky. She started her work with Tailored in 2017 and is excited to be partnering with Public Health to bring Youth Thrive to Kentucky as a whole. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shannon and Stephanie.
And Shannon's working on getting her screen shared. There we go.
Sorry about that. Okay. We want to thank you guys for having us today. And we're very excited to share about Youth Thrive. So the first thing I want you guys to look at here is a timeline that we're going to go over quickly. As you can see, from 1995 to 1997, this is when the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study was conducted by Kaiser-Permanente. It had 2 ways of data collection. The major findings here were that ACEs are common across all populations. So almost 2/3 of study participants reported at least 1 ACE, and more than 1 in 5 reported 3 or more ACEs. And in some populations that were more vulnerable to experiencing ACEs because of the social and economic conditions in which they live, learn, work, and play, those ACEs would be higher. So that because of this study, we have in 2008 was the start of the National Strengthening Families, okay? And this is a research-informed approach to increase family strengths, enhance child development, and reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. And then in 2011, there was the start of the National Youth Thrive. And this was launched, which is both a research-informed framework on youth's well-being and initiative based on the framework that is designed to change policies, practices, and services to better support healthy development and promote well-being of youth. So for the past 11 years, Youth Thrive has focused on developing strategies to improve the ways in which agencies and systems serve youth who are most vulnerable in society. So in 2015, we started our work on the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative. In the beginning, this work briefly covered the 6 protective factors, premises, and the impact of ACEs. Now this work is much more developed. So we do a deep dive into those PACEs, the 6 protective factors, the impact of the 6 premises on our work with children, youth, and families, and review the connection between those premises and the protective factors. And then in 2018, Kentucky Family Thrive. What happened here is that it started as Kentucky Strengthening Families, and then we've gotten more trainings. And so what used to be the Kentucky Strengthening Family Training is now called the Family Thrive Training. And then Kentucky Strengthening Families is like an umbrella. If you picture an umbrella, that is the initiative underneath it, has all the different trainings. So the Family Thrive looks at the whole lifespan. It does the positive and adverse child experiences, the guiding premises, and the protective factors as well. And so now we are in the early stages of developing a Youth Thrive for Kentucky. We know that all youth in Kentucky experience adversity and can benefit from incorporating these protective factors into their lives. So the goal is that we will have this Youth Thrive training ready by summer of 2023.
All right, thank you, Shannon. Since we know that the Youth Thrive Initiative is going to live under the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative, we did want to talk to you all a little bit about the mission and vision of Kentucky Strengthening Families and all the work that's come out of it. So the mission for Kentucky Strengthening Families is by enhancing protective factors that reduce the impact of adversity and increase the well-being of children and families through family, community, and state partnerships that we want to see families actually thrive. Our vision is that all Kentucky children are healthy, safe, and prepared to succeed in school and in life through families that are supported and strengthened within their community. So as Shannon talked about, if you think about the Kentucky Strengthening Families as kind of an umbrella that holds a lot of different things. It's an initiative, and the initiative is the umbrella. And you see here that we have 6 key elements under the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative umbrella. The first is Family Thrive, which formerly was known as Kentucky Strengthening Families. And that showed up in that timeline where we expanded from just talking about early childhood and adolescence and really talked about the protective factors work throughout the lifespan. There's going to be Youth Thrive in 2023. And then there's another training called Connect the Dots, which is all about building strategies for the developmental period between the ages of 2 and 5. And the 4 key components of that are ensuring supportive environments, encouraging positive behaviors, emphasizing positive discipline, and embracing unique strengths. It's a really great training, and everything in that can actually be adapted and utilized with older young people. So it's definitely something to check out if you're interested. We also have the cafe model, which falls under the umbrella, and those are the parent cafes, the youth cafes, and the provider cafes. These are kind of conversation style opportunities, around talking about protective factors and how they show up in our work. The parent and youth cafes are actually led in partnership with parent and youth with lived experience. And then the provider cafes are a lot of things. We'll talk about these things called premises later, but it's providers having that opportunity to talk about not only how the protective factors show up in their work, but also the premises.
So we know that adverse childhood experiences can lead to trauma. So we wanted to talk a little bit for a few slides here about what trauma is. And trauma is a loss of control over one's own safety or well-being in the face of overwhelming circumstances. And that event or chronic events does leave a mark, usually a coping mechanism and emotional response designed to keep a person safe, or at least feel safe when similar circumstances arise. So children who experience even one adverse childhood experiences toxic stress when supportive environments and relationships are not present. So again, they experience it when supportive relationships and environments are not present. The impact of this stress greatly depends on the protective factors that exist in the home to help the child cope with the stress of the experience. Think of toxic stress and buffering of adult relationships like this. We all know that stress is a part of life. Learning how to cope with stress is an important part of a child's healthy development, whether it's the stress of meeting new people, learning to walk, or dealing with problems. This is positive stress. There is a range of physiological responses to stress, which most of us are familiar with. Some of those would be like increased heart rate, fluctuations in stress hormones, such as cortisol. When stress occurs to a young child within an environment of supportive relationships with adults, these physiological effects are buffered and brought back down to baseline. The result is a healthy stress response system. For larger stressors, such as the death or serious illness of a loved one, a frightening injury, the divorce of one's parents, or a natural disaster, these physiological responses are sustained for a longer period of time. But still, the buffering effects of supportive adult relationships and healthy environments allow the brain to recover from what might otherwise be damaging effects. So this is tolerable stress. It's when situations of extreme stress are prolonged and unrelenting in the absence of supportive adults that a child is affected by toxic stress. These situations can also be referred to as those adverse childhood experiences, which we just reviewed. So without the support of a caring network of adults and positive elements in the environment called protective factors, toxic stress can disrupt brain architecture and lead to stress management systems that respond at relatively lower thresholds, thereby increasing the risk of stress-related physical and mental illness. Again, this is what's called toxic stress. So positive and adverse childhood experiences is just another way to look at those adverse childhood experiences. This is because adverse childhood experiences and those positive childhood experiences, they do not work separately. They are both two sides of the same coin. Adversity and positive experiences working together with the body and the brain. So I want to talk quickly about what is a positive adversity. We all experience these in our lives, and I think it's important to recognize them. So some positive adversity could be leaving home for the first time. It could be starting a new job. We know that's stressful, but it's also can be very positive. It could be starting a family. Again, you could really want those kids, and it's positive, but it's also very stressful. Or it could be positive adversity by starting to get an education or getting a new pet.
Those are some really good examples of positive stress, but we also want to talk about the positive childhood experiences. This is just a few examples. This isn't an extensive list, so definitely check out the information around positive childhood experiences, but we wanted to highlight a few. The first is the ability to talk with family about feelings, the feeling of an experience. That's okay, Shannon. You're good. The feeling of an experience that your family is supportive during, and I'm going to pull it up on my side so I don't forget any of these, y'all. Thanks for the patience. That your family is supportive during difficult times. And notice we said feeling, not that they are, because this can be very subjective. Enjoyment and participation in community traditions, feeling of belonging in a high school setting, feeling of being supported by your friends or having friends in a support network, having at least 2 non-parent adults who genuinely care. And this one can be difficult. Feelings of safety and protection by an adult at home. Again, this isn't an extensive list, but these were some examples we wanted to highlight. So you'll have this PowerPoint available, so that list is in there. But we are going to move into talking about Youth Thrive now that we've talked about kind of the overarching framework of Kentucky Strengthening Families, a little bit about ACEs. And Shannon's going to pull you up a video from the Center for the Study of Social Policy, who did the original research. From here on out in this presentation, we will probably refer to that center as CSSP. So all of my people who help with acronyms, feel free to type that in the chat box every time we say CSSP. All right, there you go, Shannon.
Adolescence and early childhood are critical periods of development. With the right opportunities and supports, they can be periods of creativity, self-discovery, and adventure. New research about adolescent development shows us that the idea of the troubled...
The volume's pretty low, Shannon. You may want to stop sharing and share your sound. Also, I'm not quite sure about other people's screens, but I actually can't see the video playing on my end.
Really? Okay, let me exit out. Let me just go ahead and do it this way. Sorry about that. Not sure why it's doing that. All right, let's try this again.
Adolescence and early childhood are critical periods of development. With the right opportunities and supports, they can be periods of creativity, self-discovery, and adventure. New research about adolescent development shows us that the idea of the troubled teen is outdated and needs to be replaced with the idea that adolescents are promising young adults in progress. Youth Thrive is a research-informed approach that promotes healing, positive growth, supportive relationships, and helps young people identify and meet their needs. Policies and programs must be anti-racist to help support young people's healthy development and well-being, and Youth Thrive was built with this in mind. When families, educators, system partners, and youth workers understand adolescent development and healing from trauma, it improves how they interact with young people and their families. Taken together, the 5 Youth Thrive protective and promotive factors help young people thrive, even in the face of risk and adversity. To learn more about Youth Thrive, visit cssp.org.
All right, so while I get the PowerPoint back on here real quick, I wanted to share a few things. Hold on one second. I wanted to share a few things about the video. So if you notice, it talks about, I'm sorry, I'm not having a good time here. I apologize. Give me 1 second. It does not want to let me share. Okay, there we go. Wow, hold on. I don't know why it's taking me to this video again. I'm sorry, this has never happened, guys. I really apologize. Let me try to figure out how we can get back to the video.
Welcome to. We can see the PowerPoint screen with the video embedded on our side, yes. So you might want to exit out of your browser.
Okay. Let's try this again here. Let me give you, I apologize. Give me 1 second.
You're doing great, Shannon. We've all had technical difficulties in the world of Zooming.
Yes. Okay, I think we're back on here. Let me get to the slide we're at. I'll make it easiest. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that. I try to get to that slide. Goodness. I'm glad you guys are being patient with me. Stephanie, do you want to tell them a little bit about what the video was about?
Yes. So
while I try to figure this out.
I absolutely can do that.
Thank you.
So some of the highlights that we like to point out from the video, and I will turn my video back on so that you all can see my face, is that adolescence is really a time for self-discovery. It's a key developmental stage. So young people are doing a lot and really learning about themselves a lot during this time. In this video too, they recognize the harm of using terms such as troubled teen, and instead of using strength-based language, they'll say troubled teen. But another way to think about it is promising young adults. Youth Thrive in general promotes healing, positive growth, supportive relationships, and identifies and meets young people's needs. The national model of the 5 protective factors help youth thrive even in the face of risk and adversity. And there's tons of other videos out here about Youth Thrive. So Shannon's going to talk to you all about specifically what we're trying to do in Kentucky. Right on time. Good job, Shannon.
Sorry, I apologize. I have no idea why it was doing that. That's weird. I was going to the link instead, but that's okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit more about what Youth Thrive is. It is for ages 9 to 26, so it is a wide range. Youth Thrive is both a research-based and youth well-being oriented initiative. All right, so CSSP changed the narrative to focus on those youth strengths, as you noticed. Okay, Youth Thrive believes that all young people should be valued, loved, and supported to reach their goals. And CSSP partners with youth, young adults, and young professionals who have lived expertise to make sure that Youth Thrives has their values and reflects their perspectives. So CSSP prioritizes equity in all Youth Thrive activities. So for example, including information and research on the impact of racism, discrimination, and bias on youth well-being. And they include that in their training materials. And they encourage systems to look at and address the worst outcomes they produce for youth of color, LGBTQ youth, and expectant and parenting youth. So CSSP's purpose for Youth Thrive is, again, to help youth be resilient, feel supported, and strengthen their communities by enhancing protective factors that reduce the impact of adversity and help youth reach their full potential to be prepared for adulthood and to thrive. And the research suggests that youth in all walks of life improve their chances for success and their ability to cope with stress when those protective factors are present. So one of Youth Thrive's goals is for organizations to incorporate protective factors when they are working with youth. And like I said earlier, Youth Thrive incorporates those positive childhood experiences and the adverse childhood experiences, guiding premises, which help youth recognize the importance of self-care and self-awareness and those protective factors. And one thing to note here is we're having a lot of research right now on those positive childhood experiences. We want you to know that protective factors really are part of those positive childhood experiences. And we know that those protective factors provide hope and are a buffer from that toxic stress.
So
all right.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm talking over you. Fun fact, I actually used to work at public health under the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative. And I realized there was a lot of P words: protective factors, premises, positive childhood experiences. So it got pretty confusing pretty fast. So I drew this graphic, and my hope is that through You Thrive, that we can get it designed better. But this is hand drawn from myself. You're welcome for that. But this graphic really is intended to kind of show how the premises and protective factors relate. So there are 6 premises, and in this picture, there's 6 protective factors, but for You Thrive, there will be 5. That's okay. The whole point of this is to say that for your work to be done well, the work in building protective factors and positive experiences in the lives of youth and family, your work has really got to be grounded in good premises. So if you look at this, the roots are in that soil, and the roots are good premises, and it's able to have abundant leaves of protective factors. So this was really the intent behind this graphic. And we wanted to highlight that for you all in an overview setting, to note that these are both different elements of the You Thrive and Family Thrive and Kentucky Strengthening Families framework, but that's how they interact. All right, so those 6 premises, I'm not going to read these definitions. You will actually get the Family Thrive action guide that has all of these. And if you want a lot of examples and a lot of activities around these, we encourage you to attend a full Family Thrive training, and definitely a You Thrive training when it's out in 2023, to really take a deep dive into these. But we want to go over these. So the first is self-awareness, and that's just in general, having good awareness of what your wellness looks like, how you're interacting with the clients that you're working with, in general, things that you can do better at, or things that you're really great at. That is a key element in being a good provider. Being strength-based, which can be really, really difficult sometimes, especially because we're our own worst critics. So we tend not to be so strength-based with ourselves. But being strength-based with the youth and family that you're working with is really, really important. The third is valuing relationships in a non-judgmental way. So this is one that, even though we don't always go over examples, I always like to try to squeeze in the example, because this one really changes the way people think about relationships. I think it's easy for us to say, of course we value relationships, but what happens when our own judgment gets in the way? So in the National You Thrive setting, one thing that we talked about was a young woman who lived in an impoverished neighborhood, and her biggest protective factor in her life was the social connections that she made through her double Dutch jump rope team. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are, the only person that was funding the team's ability to go to championships and their jerseys and all of the money it took to really keep this double Dutch team going was a local gang leader. And it would have been very easy as a service provider in her life to come in and immediately say, you need to cut that connection off. But by being non-judgmental and allowing her to see the strength in that relationship, as that young person developed, the service provider that was working with her was able to talk about how she was able to find those connections elsewhere. And really, I think she wrote a grant to fund her own double Dutch team. So she was able to find a different way to meet that connection and use that relationship in a place where she wasn't ready to replace it. And I have a cat, and he's trying to join us. So apologies for that. We are just Hot Mess Express today. So the fourth premise is about race, power, and privilege, and your awareness of that and how that plays out in the relationship between you as a provider and the families and youth you work with. There's lots of material out there about this one, so we encourage you to take advantage of conversations and education around race, power, and privilege. being trauma informed, and also being culturally responsive in the work that you do. So Shannon's going to talk to you all now about what the protective factors are, which is the meat of Youth Thrive.
All right, so Kentucky Youth Thrive is going to utilize the protective factors associated with the nationally recognized Strengthening Families framework. And like I said earlier, we're going to emphasize the importance of nurturing and attachment through each of those protective factors. So just briefly here, these protective factors are youth resiliency, and that is youth bounce back when life gives them challenges. Social connections, so youth have genuine connections with others. Knowledge of development, so this is youth understand the science of their development. Concrete supports, so youth find resources and support in their community that helps them. And then the cognitive and social emotional competency, and this is youth know how to communicate their thoughts and feelings effectively. We will talk briefly about each of these protective factors in the next couple of slides. But the hopeful news is that even if youth experience adversity, when we incorporate those protective factors, they will be able to increase their health and well-being, increase their capacity to thrive, and the protective factors will buffer again against that toxic stress that is related to those adverse childhood experiences.
So as Shannon just said, we're going to dive deeper a little bit into the protective factors. The first one is knowledge of adolescent development. And I really love these definitions because youth help to create them. So put simply, youth understand the science of their development. But in the next slide, you'll see a longer definition. And that is young people understanding their own behavior and stage of maturity, both physically and mentally, and understanding brain development and the impact trauma can have on the developing brain. Again, another example I love to always insert here is I work in drop-in center settings, so I have lots of opportunity to connect with young people at our drop-in centers. And one trend I have seen as TikTok and serial killer documentaries have become more popular is the details of what it's like to have a personality disorder. So I've had a couple of conversations where a young person is kind of worried that they may have a narcissistic personality disorder or something like that. And once we actually dive into the conversation and I ask why, it's usually because maybe their music taste or their taste in clothing or style changes depending on what friend group they're around or they hang out with. And I've been there. I know what that feels like, to just like kind of freak out and think for a moment that hey, I may have something very serious happening here. But once we dive into that and I'm able to talk with them about, okay, that's actually normal. As a teenager and young adult, you're going to have these phases and your taste in things will change from moment to moment sometimes. And that's very normal. They're not going to diagnose any adolescent with a personality disorder anyway. But you should know that these things are actually a natural part of your development. And I always get a laugh at that too, happening more and more. The first conversation I actually had was with my niece. But it seems to be happening more. So definitely a really good way to highlight the importance of those conversations with young people around what's actually normal during development versus what could be a sign of something more serious and something to take seriously. And then I think Shannon's going to talk about social connections.
All right, so this protective factor is social connections. And this is that youth have real connections with others. So another definition for this is social connections is having healthy, sustained relationships with people, the community, and a force greater than oneself that promotes a sense of trust, belonging, and a feeling that they matter. And so I'm going to give an example here as well. I have 4 grown adult children. And out of all 4 of them, 3 of them had really good relationships with others, people they could trust, as well as adults in their lives. But my one daughter really struggled. She was bullied. She didn't have friends that really were healthy for her. and she didn't really have those adult figures in her life. And I've noticed a difference between my kids that did have this and her. Mental health does run in my family. We do struggle with depression, but hers is more intense than the rest of us. She also struggles with her self-esteem and has anxiety and just still struggles with making those relationships work. And next one will be Stephanie.
So the next one is concrete supports in times of need. And young people define this as youth being able to find resources that can help them and know how to ask for help. Excuse me. The longer definition is understanding the importance of asking for help and advocating for oneself, receiving quality services designed to preserve youth's dignity, providing opportunities for skill development, and promoting healthy development. Some examples of this that tie back to the premises are being strength-based and trauma-informed. So another great example of this is the tailored drop-in centers, which is what I work in. And those are all programs that are designed for youth, by youth. And the whole reason those came about is because we saw that services and resources were not accessible for all young people in Kentucky. So if you look at the data, what actually happens is there is a fair amount of young people in services until about the age of 15, and then those services drop off. And then on the other side of emerging adulthood at age 30 is when we see a spike in people engaging back in services. So by taking the approach of listening to young people and co-designing a program for them, we have really been able to see an uptick in young people be able to take part of resources in a way that they are driving. So this is my shout out to my program. I will make sure the website goes to you all in the chat box right now as Shannon is talking. But this is a huge way that we try to combat this.
All right, so the next protective factor is cognitive, social, and emotional competency. So youth know how to communicate their thoughts and feelings effectively. So let's explore what cognitive, social, and emotional competency looks like for families and for youth. It's acquiring skills and attitudes that are essential for forming an independent identity and having a productive, responsible, and satisfying adulthood. So examples here would be self-regulation, executive functioning, and character strengths. And I always like to share as well as Stephanie, here's an example from one of my kids. My son is a graduate student in physics right now. He's always loved math, but when he was in 6th grade, his teacher noticed that that's pretty much all he liked to do, and that he was really struggling with self-regulation, social skills with other children, and just having different character strengths. So she worked really hard on that with him to make him more well-rounded and learning how to handle different emotions in the classroom. So now that he's an adult, he is really able to do those things. All right, and then Stephanie will talk about youth resiliency.
Yes, so the final protective factor is youth resilience, and young people define this as being able to bounce back or bounce forward when life gives them challenges. So the longer definition is managing stress and functioning well when faced with stressors, challenges, or adversity. And the outcome.
Uh-oh, Steph, you froze. Now you're back.
Okay. Can you hear from me again? I'll read the slide one more time.
You stopped where you talked about the outcome, so you can start there.
Okay. Thank you so much. The outcome is personal growth or positive change. An example that I really like to talk about here is just the opportunity to be a leader. It's probably one of the most tangible ways we look at how young people use their adversity to bounce forward. For me, I'm a certified youth peer support specialist, and you heard in my introduction that I've been using my lived experience with adversity for over 10 years now, which makes me feel old, and that's okay. So this is a really great way that we can help young people to really be resilient and remind themselves of their resilience. Oftentimes when I still struggle with my mental health challenges, being able to look at the things I've accomplished because of it allows me to muster up the courage to keep going and continue to be resilient. So we encourage you all, if you want more information as well about how to engage with leaders, or you'd like to have us talk to your leaders about how to get involved with Youth Thrive, we're totally here for it. But it's a great way to continue to build resilience in young people. All right, so now we're going to talk about the application of Youth Thrive and what that looks like. So because we're here at the System of Care Academy Learning Series, we did want to kind of talk about how this aligns with the System of Care core values. Because we always say when we're talking to partners that you're probably already doing protective factors work. We, in fact, know you're already doing protective factors work. We just talk about the use of common language and really working together to make sure everybody has access to all the protective factors in their lives. So if you're here, hopefully that means you're a System of Care partner and you're aware of what the core values are. I don't have definitions here. And we want to make this slide quick for time's sake. So I'm just going to give you the headings of the 4 core values of System of Care and talk about how they connect with the premises as well as the protective factors. So the 4 System of Care core values here are youth and family driven, being community-based, being culturally and linguistically responsive, and being trauma informed. So you see here at this crosswalk, all of the System of Care core values match up with a premise, which then matches up with a protective factor. So an example would be if you are really focusing on being more youth and family driven in your care setting, then you're probably being strength-based as your premise. You see young people and families and you see the value they bring to the team. You can see them as resources and partners. And like I talked about in the resiliency example a few minutes ago, you're building their resiliency. And you're probably doing more than that too, but that is the key protective factor that relates to that. Again, you'll have these slides so you can look at them and ask us lots of questions if you have them. But we did want to go ahead and provide this overview to you as it relates to the System of Care Academy.
Okay, so I'm going to talk with you for a minute about youth cafes. These are a safe, welcoming, and inviting environment for youth to build connections through conversations and to develop relationships. So these youth cafes, they're designed around resiliency, incorporating those protective factors, and they adhere to a strength-based philosophy. So again, this is an opportunity for youth to listen to one another and learn from one another in a supportive environment. And the cafes are utilized as a discussion style format. So this isn't a training. Youth cafes are youth directed. Kentucky Strengthening Families will partner with youth, young adults, and young professionals with lived expertise. The youth who have been trained in Youth Thrive will function as table hosts during the cafe to help facilitate conversations. The cafes, like I said, are centered around those protective factors. They can incorporate a theme. So some ideas could be suicide prevention or bullying or preparing for college. Everyone in the cafe adheres to what we refer to as cafe agreements. These are in place just to establish boundaries and explain expectations. So some of these cafe agreements are to speak from your own experience, to use I statements, to listen attentively, to not interrupt, no judgments. So this would be positive or negative judgments, refrain from giving advice, and to maintain that confidentiality. So part of the cafes is having cafe cards, and these are questions that are related to each of the protective factors. Kentucky Strengthening Families is creating some that will be free. There are some that you can buy online as well. So what happens here is that the youth participate in 3 rounds, and each round consists about 15 minutes. And during that round, they will discuss different questions on that cafe card. After those 15 minutes, the youth will rotate to a new table and get to know different youth. During each round, like I said, they will discuss at least one question around a protective factor, possibly more. So an example here of a cafe card would be, where does your strength come from? And this is for the protective factor of resiliency. Okay, so I want to talk here a little bit, how do we incorporate protective factors into the work that you guys are already doing with youth? So I wanted to share an example of an organization from Ohio, and they incorporate protective factors and their Youth Thrive resources into their work by collaborating with other organizations in their community. So Ohio has a program called Your Path to Health. This is an alcohol, drug addiction, and mental health service. It's comprised of mostly volunteer community members and multiple partnerships. So protective factors are part of the education they provide their clients. They also have a resource guide, and this is information about the different organizations that talk about protective factors. And they also work together to provide events for youth around those protective factors. So here are some ways that we can incorporate protective factors throughout our community. So one idea would be having an awareness campaign. And this would be multiple agency partners or organizations that create an awareness campaign around protective factors and how they are used in your work with youth. You could also provide a community event for youth or their families and incorporate protective factors into the event. So you could have a youth cafe and provide information about why those protective factors are so important. You can provide education on topics that increase protective factors. So example here, let's say you are teaching a meditation class. You can emphasize that this is part of the protective factor, social and emotional competency. So again, being intentional. Plan activities and goals around protective factors. And we just ask that you use that common language. And then youth cafes. Again, these can be done in multiple settings, such as schools, libraries, and churches. We do know of a few libraries that are starting these, as well as schools. Some schools are doing these during their lunch break and study hall. So it's a shortened youth cafe, maybe 15 to 30 minutes instead of the full hour. And also Youth Thrive trainings. Again, these trainings can be offered to anyone that works with youth, to youth themselves, or caregivers at any organization. So some more examples that I would like to share about incorporating protective factors in your work with youth or in your community. So for resiliency, as you can see here, we have provide opportunities for healthy eating and exercise routines. Something else that you could do is create positive social media campaigns that engage the youth. For social connections, some ideas for that would be to work closely with family and parent advisory boards, or to connect youth to mentors or peer specialists with similar interests. For knowledge of development, you can provide accurate information on sexual health, or create a handout and collect ideas from youth that have been beneficial to them. For concrete supports, invite youth leaders to be co-trainers, and host a reality store program at your school or community to help students learn basic skills in financial planning, goal setting, and discussion making. And then for social and emotional competency, you can plan social events that allow people to interact with their peers in healthy, positive ways. Or you can teach soft skills such as manners, workplace readiness, and people skills. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. So what you see on the screen right now is a worksheet that we developed to help you all think about how this applies in your work. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. That has an example of one filled out. Again, we're going to be sharing this with you in a PDF form that you can fill out, as well as the Family Thrive Action Guide that has some more information and definitions in it. Can you all see that? You can see, can you see it? Okay, good. I'm seeing floods of thumbs ups, so that's helpful. Yesterday, I was sharing my desktop screen with Shannon while I was going through this and didn't know it until I was done talking. So the first page of this is just kind of a prettier, more applicable example of that poster that we had a screenshot of way earlier in the presentation. So that is just for reference. The second page of it is something I filled out, and I just came up with a hypothetical youth drop-in center based on our programs. And what that does is it goes through each protective factor and asks you, what activities do you or your program do already that support the protective factor? So if you look here, there are different things, and there's lots of acronyms in the example. Because there's specialized things that we do in our program for each of the protective factors. But we just want you to kind of list them to kind of get a good count of what you're doing for each protective factor. And notice one of them, we're not really doing anything in this hypothetical drop-in center. So that helps me fill out the second part. The second part asks you to look at the protective factors above and think about which your current work supports the most. So we have lots of wealth in social emotional competence. And then the next question asks, how can we partner with other groups around the area to kind of spread that wealth with social emotional competence? So the idea was I can partner with the Family and Youth Resource Center at the high school and maybe facilitate youth cafes during lunch hours. Which was an example we usually talk about during this presentation. So that's very possible. It's already been done. So, you know, that's something that we could do. And then it asks, which protective factor does your current work support least? Like I said before, knowledge of adolescent development. We're not really doing anything. So for us, we'll partner with a state entity, a university, or health provider to provide an interactive series on adolescent development for the youth and young adults who come to our program. For us, a key element is making sure that we partner with youth leaders to talk about this. So we'll bring it up at a youth council meeting and ask them if this is something they're interested in and what specifically can we do to make sure that it's relevant and interesting for every young person. So that's the first worksheet that we encourage you to fill out. And then the second one is about those premises that we discussed earlier. And this is really just more for you to just kind of think about. We really want you to rate yourself on how comfortable you are with all of the premises, and then come up with a task to do or something that you can do to get more comfortable with the one maybe that you're struggling with the most. So in my example, I just said trauma informed, and some ideas I have is I can join trauma informed care training or a learning community around trauma informed care principles. And then maybe another thing I could do is draw feedback from young people through like a survey or a focus group about their experiences getting services from me or the other drop-in centers. So that is just an example. And again, you'll get the blank version of this and the example in PDF so that you can use this yourself. But also know that when we do the full trainings, we'll probably utilize something like this as well. So you'll have opportunities there if you want to engage. Now Shannon's going to talk to you all about partnerships. And what we're really looking at in the phase we're at in Youth Thrive right now.
All right, so I want to make this quickly so you guys, if you have any questions, we can answer them. But we are excited to announce that we have contracted with CSSP's Youth Thrive team to begin the training process and hopes to bring this impactful work to the state. So we have 2 different trainings that are being offered that are free, and there's no limit to how many people come. So we ask you to let people in the community know, encourage people to attend so they can get more information about Youth Thrive. So there is one on November 15th from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is virtual, and this is for youth with lived expertise. And then they're offering one for those who work with youth on November 17th from 10 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's virtual as well. That one will have an 1.5-hour lunch break, as well as a couple other breaks throughout the day. I can put those into the chat at the end to for you to register if you're interested in that. And then we will take that and we will have 25 people that will do a training of trainers Youth Thrive. This is 17 hours worth of training. Those people will come back. Half of those will be youth, and they'll come back to Kentucky, and we will create a work group, and we will start working on Kentucky's training for Youth Thrive. And we, again, like we said, we hope to have this training available by summer of 2023. And then just quickly, we have different levels of involvement. We ask you just to think about how you can be a partner with Youth Thrive. The advocate level is just supporting Kentucky Strengthening Families Youth Thrive, providing resources to youth, incorporating those protective factors, and if possible, attending the Center for Studies Social Policies Youth Thrive overview. For the partner level would be those same things, except also working on the work group. And then for the leadership level, those would be those who are attending the TOT, that is 17 hours worth of training. Okay, so we thank you for your time. And I'm gonna put this on here. If you do have other questions after today, you can email me at shannong.parker@ky.gov. You can also email Stephanie. She'll probably forward it to me, but you're welcome to email her as well. And thank you guys. So let's see if there's any questions in our chat. And I'm going to stop sharing.
You do have questions. So the first one is, what is a healthy length of time for a child to recover from stress? What length of time spent in stress can cause the toxic, damageable stress?
So I'm not on mute, right? Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna do this as a therapist because that's probably like Stephanie's probably like, I don't know. Unfortunately, some kids we know are truthfully always in toxic stress, and that's depressing to say. Obviously, that's not healthy for them. And that's why trying to help them have protective factors is just so important. But a healthy time, really, depending on what it is, we say if they've lost a parent, it's about a year to recover. And I hate the word recover, but getting back to somewhat of a normal routine, the child's starting to feel better. And the younger the child is, the longer it may take. They may seem fine. They may seem fine for months, and then all of a sudden some behaviors come out because it takes them a while to process that trauma. So there's not really a timeline, but there would be concern if it's been about a year and a child just doesn't seem to be getting better at all. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, I was on my other screen and not unmuting myself. What are you seeing concerning identity issues and youth struggles with this? It seems like it has almost become a trend for a youth to identify as trans, bi, pan, etc. But I find that the youth is really struggling understanding what this is, the seriousness of that, and that it's not a trend. I find this makes it harder for youth that truly identify as transgender or another alternative lifestyle.
Okay. Do you want to take that, Stephanie, or I can? It's up to you.
I was going to say, I'd love to hear your perspective as a therapist first, and then I'll build on it if I have anything to add.
Okay. I haven't worked with a lot of youth. I do actually work with younger children for the most part. But I think there's a pressure to identify pretty young. I don't know if that's bad or good, but I do feel like I've seen some youth that they just feel like they have to have labels. And so we just work on, hey, don't worry about the labels, just be you. Especially, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. That seems to be something I've seen in the therapy practice. But to be honest, I don't have a whole lot of information on that. So I actually would love to hear what Stephanie has, because I know you work with youth at Tailored. So
yeah, so we work with 16 to 25-year-olds in particular within Tailored, and we don't see lots of offense being taken. What we really try to focus on is emotional safety and an environment of acceptance and education. Another topic that we talk about is adultism and how this plays into these assumptions about certain opinions or identities that young people have, especially when it seems like there's an automatic assumption that they're going through a phase. And while that may be true, I think the best approach is just being accepting, trying to educate yourself, working with a young person, let them be the one to educate you in some ways. That has been the best way I've seen it handled. But it is complex, and I encourage you, if you're talking about a specific young person, to reach out to your support network in that area and connect and really take a deeper dive into that with somebody who can be supportive on an ongoing basis to really figure out what's going on.
And someone asked, how does this program differ from Sources of Strength?
I can answer that, but do you want to, Shannon?
You can go right ahead. I know you know more about Sources of Strength, so
yeah,
go ahead.
You can build off of whatever I say too. So the protective factors framework is a framework. So it's really more like, I try to say it's more of like a philosophy of thought, where Sources of Strength does protective factors work within the program setting. So they are a program and we're really a framework. Yes, there's things that you can do, like the youth cafes with protective factors. And, if you are somebody who is in charge of a Sources of Strength group or program, reach out to us, because we'd love to see how it would play out in that setting. But it is a bit different in that way on the surface. But I would say, knowing a little bit about Sources of Strength, they do protective factors work. They just don't call it that, like many of us do. We do protective factors work. We just don't call it that. So I hope that answered the question.
She said it's very similar, and she's trying to get Sources of Strength going here. Amanda, hopefully you already have someone from the Department for Behavioral Health assisting with that. And if not, if you want to drop that in the chat, you don't have anyone helping. So we'll try. Stephanie, can you drop that in the chat box? The contact?
I think it's Laura. You would probably know more than me, Lee.
I will drop it in the chat right after I ask this question.
Thank you.
Okay, so how can we get more info for being involved? But before you answer that, someone else asked, and I think it's along the same lines, they asked if there's going to be a follow-up email in reference to the upcoming trainings and ways to register.
Okay, so if you are interested in being involved in any way, you can email me. We will have like a Zoom meeting and discuss how we can work together. As far as the trainings, I have been sending emails to remind people to register. There'll be another one in 2 weeks. If you're not on that, again, just shoot me an email and I'll add you to make sure you get the information. I have no problem. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I have no problem doing that. But yeah, just shoot me an email and we can discuss some ways to work together.
So the email address I dropped in the chat is Laura Edwards, who works in the Division of Mental Health, and she should be your contact, but if that is changed, she will know who the next person is. So that would be a great one to email regarding Sources of Strength. As far as trainings, we'll drop Shannon's email address in the chat too. Shannon, I do have handy the flyers you emailed out the other day. Do you want me to drop those in chat? The
Yes,
introduction and
yes, I
the
appreciate that.
okay.
I'm not the most technology savvy, as you've seen today.
Those things happen.
Again, you did great, Shannon.
Okay, and let me scroll back through the chat box because there were lots of comments today, and I want to make sure I captured all of the questions. So can you touch on that last slide a little bit more about the levels of involvement and what that might look like?
Sure. Okay, so again, the advocate level, that's more like, we call it like the cheerleader. So it's just someone that's like supporting the program, they're giving information, but that's pretty much their own involvement. It's just letting people know that we offer these trainings and just talking about protective factors if they're able to in their work. So, and then a partner level, this would be people who are more involved. We have Kentucky Strengthening Families, a leadership meeting. So that would be somewhere we'd like to add them to. That's where we do our work groups. They'd be involved in helping create the training, looking at the PowerPoint slides, adding information, those types of things. And as well, just promoting Kentucky Strengthening Families, especially the Youth Thrive. And then that leadership level, that's really those who are going to get the TOT training, but it's also those that when we come back to Kentucky, we're going to create our own TOT. And then anyone who wants to train will take that TOT training. And so they would be in that leadership level as well. Especially because we're going to be working with youth with lived expertise. We are going to have a lot of expectations and different types of trainings to make sure that they know how to work with the youth that they're training with. It looks like Stephanie, you had something to say as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask, because that just reminded me to kind of build on what you're saying, that we are really partnering with public health to really try to help them get more young people with lived experience in that leadership level where somebody would go to the training of trainers. There were 12 spots for youth or young adults with lived experience. We're not capping age because a lot of us who do this work full time and are highly invested are above 25. Right here. I'm 30 now. Already said that, but thing. Yes, Amanda, I see you out there. So Amanda Woodall's interested. So make sure to email Shannon and she'll connect with you. So I was just wondering where we're at with that, Shannon. Do we know how many people we have kind of really locked in and committed, or are we still kind of have an open 12 spots?
We have at least 7 for sure that are 100% committed.
Okay. And because I've been through it
12.
before. Yeah. Okay, good. So because I've been through it before, I'm not committing to that spot. I will be a visitor at the training just to kind of help add context. So that means we have about 5 spots left. If you are somebody who is not employed full-time at an agency of some sort and you're interested in being one of those lived experience spots, or if you have young people that are interested in becoming trainers, we're really trying to build this that they can learn to become trainers. It could be the first time they do a training. So we encourage you to just reach out to Shannon and get that information. But we are partnering with the System of Care 5 grant as well as the tailored grant to make sure those young people get paid for their time if they're not being paid by their employer for their time. So definitely wanted to say shout out. And this is really exciting because many of our initiatives that are geared towards youth in our state they don't start in the beginning with gathering youth voice and really partnering with young people with lived experience. So this is why I'm on board. First of all, if you know me personally, but that's major props to public health for doing that. Because it can be a bit of a tough road at first. But we know for a fact, because of the research, because of everything that's out there, that this is going to make Youth Thrive way more successful So we're really grateful to be in partnership with them.
Anything else you want to add about ways to connect or get involved besides emailing you? Trainings that are already scheduled?
We do have Family Thrive trainings virtually. You can find those on Eventbrite. And we do have a couple parent cafes trainings, but you do have to go through the Family Thrive training first before you can do the parent cafe training. And that is in person usually. But really it's just being intentional, incorporating those protective factors in your work, calling them protective factors, and just letting people know that these trainings are available. But it really is stuff that you're already doing. It's just incorporating it or being more intentional with the work you're doing.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to that too. If you're an impatient person like I am, and you want to go ahead and like go through a training on the protective factors and learn about this in a way that you can really think about this in your work like right now, Family Thrive is a good place to start. The way Family Thrive came about, even though we already talked about it in a presentation, it incorporates a lot of the things that we learned in Youth Thrive. So it is a good kind of middle ground between Kentucky Strengthening Families and what Youth Thrive is going to end up being here in Kentucky. So we definitely encourage you to sign up for one of those. They're free. They can be lengthy. Another major props to public health. Since I went through one, it has gotten much shorter. But they're chock full of good information and good discussion. And the trainings are set up to be very, very interactive. So the information actually moves pretty fast. And for me, when I went through the protective factors work, it was so transformational, not only in the way that I did the work I do with young people, but also for me personally. I also say that throughout this journey, I've been through a lot of therapy in my life. I really have. And we're not going to make this about Stephanie's story, but I have. There's tons of new trauma training or trauma treatments coming out all the time. But for me, I think I'm just an individual who needs to be empowered about healing some stuff in my own way, and the protective factors really enabled me to do that. It like gave me a framework in my mind to like really look at what was missing protective factor wise in my life. And once I was able to like recognize like one thing for me, social connections was kind of a missing piece. I built those up, was more intentional, and I've been able to get a lot of healing through that. So when I talk with other youth, that is one thing I always talk about, is just not only how transformational it's been in the work, but also for me. And that's what we really want to see eventually with this, is that young people are getting this information directly themselves, and they're being able to apply it in their own lives and give the advice of that to their peers as well, because it can be so powerful.
That looks like all of the questions in chat and Q&A. Do you guys have any final comments before we wrap up?
No, I'm just grateful I have Stephanie. I hope you guys can see why that. I'm serious that youth lived expertise. We really need those in the training, especially to reach out to those youth. So we're grateful she was able to do this for us.
Yeah, we're really just grateful for you all as well. So thank you everybody for joining, and we appreciate your patience with the technical difficulties and my cat trying to join the presentation today. We're just so grateful. So thank you all so much.
And one final word for me, don't forget that in the coming weeks is when the link will come out to access your survey and to print out your certificate. It will not come today. It will not come this week. And also be sure to use the same email to register for each Learning Series event. That's really important because it is the unique identifier that we use to track you across all sessions to make sure that you get credit for all of your attendance. And also dropped in the chat box, We are recording the session and it will be available soon. And that link I posted is where the other sessions are posted. We can't offer our CEUs for watching the recordings, but it's a lot of great information if you've missed any of them. So thank you for joining today.